you're new here, my name is Lisa, and I love to do videos on luxury handbags, shoes, ready to wear. I like to do some styling videos, and I do those things from the perspective of someone who is in the middle of her life, as well as someone who is mid-size. So if that kind of content sounds interesting to you, I would love it if you would join us here. Click that subscribe button down below and the notification bell so you know every time I upload a video. So a couple months ago, I did my very first Q&A video, and there were a lot of questions in that Q&A that had to do with why my family moved to New York, what was it like to live in New York, what are the differences of living in New York, questions about sort of my luxury shopping habits as it relates to New York, and things like that. And so I decided at that time, and I mentioned it in that video, that honestly, that was a lot of information to share, and that it would probably be best to do its own sort of New York video. So this is that video. Like I said, many of you have requested this. I have received, questions on my Instagram about why we moved to New York, questions on videos on why we moved to New York. So hopefully this will answer all of those questions. So I do have some notes here, so I kind of try to keep on some sort of logical format to this video. So if you see me looking down, that's what I am looking at. But let's start with probably the question that most people have, which is the why. And so I'm going to start sort of chronologically and bring you back from the beginning up to obviously the current time, which is that we're here. So David and I, my husband, have talked about, relocating from Kansas City at some point, but after the twins, who are our youngest children, were out of school. At that time that we sort of had some of these discussions, we had always loved New York and thought it would be a great place to live. But honestly, I felt pretty strongly at that time about letting the kids graduate from where they were in school, in that school district, and staying in our current, or I should say our previous residence, but our, at the time, current residence in Kansas City until they were not necessarily out of college, but at least through the first couple years where they weren't really probably coming home every summer, that kind of thing, so that they still had a place that was something that they knew, something that they were familiar with, something that they were comfortable with, that was their home, right? So that was sort of our intention, was so, maybe in another 8 to 10 years, we would look at moving out of the Kansas City area somewhere else, probably New York. So that was sort of always my perspective up until September of 2021, when we went on our very belated 20 and 25th wedding anniversary trip and sort of early 30th anniversary trip. It sort of combined all those three events to Europe. And one of the places we went, as many of you know, is Paris, which is where I was able to get my Birkin, which was so exciting. So while we were in Paris on that trip, I took note of some of the children who just were out and about in the city, on their own. And I thought, how amazing is it that, these kids are taking the metro and out walking around the streets and enjoying the vibrancy that Paris brings to them and everybody that lives there, and the cultural differences that the city embraces, and the diversity, and all of those things that just make living in a city like that so different and, in my opinion, very valuable. And I thought about how insular and isolated our children's lives were. Now, in some respects, a lot of people would think that that's a great thing, and that, our children were in this sort of very safe bubble, if you want to call it that, and not exposed to, maybe a higher crime rate, or, something that a lot of people think of when they think of a big city. But what I also felt is that they weren't getting exposed to different cultures and different ethnicities and different religious backgrounds and culture and just everything that a large city like New York, like Paris, can bring to them. And to be very honest with you, really felt like we might be doing a disservice to our children by continuing to only allow them to see a very, very narrow slice of the world. So as we always do with our European trips, on the way back, we always stop in New York as kind of a buffer, a time zone buffer, if you want to call it. In other words, you're going, from 6 to 7 hours ahead of time backwards. And so it's just a kind of way to sort of transition back into our current time zone. We always like to stop in New York, and in addition to that, we just really love New York. So we take the opportunity, because we generally always fly through New York, to give us the chance to take a couple days and, enjoy New York. And like I said, as a bonus, it helps us kind of transition into back to our own time zone. So as always, like we did this trip, we stopped in New York. And I think it was when we were walking around during that trip is when I mentioned this idea to David. And so I didn't say anything when we were in Paris. I just, like I said, sort of made some mental notes and kind of let it marinate in my brain. And then when we got to New York and I was, sort of seeing some similarities, kids getting around on their own, and just the nuances and differences and things in New York City, I thought, I'm going to bring it up. So I mentioned it to him, and, you don't know him, but he was just ecstatic. I mean, the thought that we could actually move earlier potentially was amazing to him, because like I said, it was pretty much me that was always holding back from moving out of Kansas City before the kids, like I said, were all the way through school. So we also talked about actually potentially moving out of the country, but quickly decided that that probably wasn't going to be a viable option for us, just because of our work situations. It would, unless we moved to like Canada or someplace maybe in Central America, someplace that, was the same time zone as we were, it would be very difficult to maintain our current jobs and be in a time zone that was, again, 6 or 7 hours difference from where all of our work was happening. So we pretty much fairly quickly set that, aside, or actually kind of threw it out and went back to the idea of moving to New York. So when we were here then in November of 2021, so a couple months later after we came back from our Europe trip, we took the twins and my older son, Jack. Our older daughter had plans, and she was in a new job, so she couldn't really travel at that time. So the 5 of us came to New York for Thanksgiving, and we were here for almost a week, and we loved the city again, as always. And this was really the first time that the twins had a chance to really get to know New York. Hannah had come with David on a business trip when she was 8, but pretty much the only thing she did there was go to Times Square, and that's where she wanted to go like every night. She just, she was 8, she loved the lights. So we brought the kids. Jack had been here when he was in high school. He's always loved New York. Nick had never been here, but he quickly found that he loved the city. So while we were here in November, we looked at some properties. We looked primarily on Roosevelt Island, which is a tiny little sliver of an island that is technically a part of Manhattan. It's not like a separate borough, so it's not like Brooklyn or the Bronx or Queens or Staten Island. It is part of Manhattan, but it's separated by water. So it's located actually within the East River, and there's a trolley tram thing that it's almost like a gondola that goes back and forth. There's a subway that goes back and forth, and you can drive back and forth to the little island. And the nice thing about Roosevelt Island is it's a little more affordable. It is much more neighborhoody, I would say, because it's removed from the main part of Manhattan. So when you walk out of your building on Roosevelt Island, you don't feel like you're in Manhattan. Now, granted, you're only one subway stop away, but our whole point of moving here was, if we're gonna move here, we want to feel like we're in the middle of it, right? We want to feel like we're in the city, which is, why, for example, we didn't move to New Jersey. I mean, our opinion was if we're going to move, we're not going to move to a suburb of New York, because if I'm going to live in a suburb, I might as well stay in Kansas City, where it's way more affordable. And, we owned our house and our life was great cost of living, everything. So that just made no sense to us. So we kind of quickly scrapped Roosevelt Island. We did look at some things in like the Harlem area, sort of, north of the park. And at that time, it just didn't seem like it was economically feasible for us to move. So after that trip, we kind of honestly took New York off the table. We sort of put it back to okay, let's put it on the back burner. This really isn't something that we can afford to do. And when I say afford to do, I mean afford to do it and still maintain the lifestyle of which we were accustomed, right? It wasn't my desire to move somewhere where now we were going to have to watch every single penny that we spent and, change, like I said, the quality of life of our children. So we thought, okay, it's not really the time. We'll just wait until go back to plan A, which was, we'll look at this when the kids have graduated and are in college, whatever, and then we can decide what we want to do as just a couple. So that's kind of where it was left. And then I was telling, I think, my hairdresser at the time, this sort of about our trip and the conversation. And she's like, if you have an opportunity, a friend of mine, or I think it was another client, actually got an Airbnb for like a month just to kind of like try out what it was like. Because to be very honest with you, visiting someplace and living someplace are two very, very different things, especially when they are so diametrically opposed from where you're currently living, right? Life in Kansas City and the way you live in Kansas City is very, very different than how you live in the city of New York. Now, I'm not talking about living in New Jersey or living in, Westchester or, someplace in Connecticut or even Long Island. Like, I'm talking about being in Manhattan is a very different way of living. And so I was like, wow, that'd be a great idea. The twins are going to be going to camp in the summer for a month. Let's take that opportunity. We're not going to have any kids around. David and I, let's get an Airbnb and see if we really even like New York. It just is sort of a precursor to, okay, what do we might want to do when the kids have graduated? Well, as it turned out, Hannah decided she didn't want to go to camp, and then Nick had to be in New York for something in June. Now that Hannah was going to have to come, we needed to get a 2-bedroom. Well, if we were going to get a 2-bedroom, and like I said, Nick had to be here in June anyway for a conference that he was doing, then we might as well bring Nick too and just do it in June so that he could go because he was going to camp in July. So fast forward from, like I said, our trip in November to June then of 2022 is when we were here for a month. So we ended up, David found this great short-term rental. We were able to rent it for the month. So we were here for the month of June, and we had Morgan and Jack came for little bits of different time while we were there, but the majority of the time it was the 4 of us. So Nick and Hannah in one room, and they had a bathroom, and then we had our master bedroom and our bathroom, and a lovely living space and a dining area, a tiny, tiny little kitchen, which definitely made me know and appreciate my big kitchen in Kansas City. But it was basically our way to do sort of a test run, if you want to call it that, to see, okay, what is it like not to have a car? What is it like to have to walk to the grocery store and carry all of your grocery bags back? What is it like to take public transportation? What is it like to walk everywhere? All of those things that make living in New York part of, New York. And it ended up being amazing. So while we were here in June, we looked for some places at the time, but we were still a little unsure as to whether or not we were going to pull the trigger. We wanted to make sure that the kids were on board with it. As you know from some of my vlogs, Hannah wasn't always 100% on board, although I will say now she is very, very glad that she is here and has made a ton of friends and, I think is very, very happy with the decision that we made. But we wanted to make sure that, this was something that was at least okay with them. We were going to be uprooting them from, everything they had known. But I guess the point is, and again, at the very crux of why we did it was to give Nick and Hannah the opportunity to see a world that they only saw on TV, and to see a more diverse world, to see a more open world, to see, just like I said, get a different perspective on the world than they would have had simply growing up in a suburb of Kansas City, going to school with the same kids and only having that as their exposure in life. And please understand, there is nothing wrong with that. For anybody who lives in that kind of situation, it's amazing. It's wonderful. And we loved, our teachers, and, the friends that our kids had were great. And, the education that our children were receiving was fantastic. And the cost of living was amazing. But there's something to be said to change. And so we decided as a family to move to New York City. So another one of the questions that I got was like, how did you do all this? Like, how did you make the move happen? And, what was involved and all that kind of thing. So obviously we had to sell our house. So in about the end of August timeframe, we put our house on the market. And as a result of that, and knowing that we were going to be potentially moving, we went through the whole house and got rid of a ton of stuff. We didn't really have to do much to the house as far as any kind of fixing of anything. We had just built the house, 2.5 years, 3 years before. So it was a very, very new house. It was in great condition, but we did have to, if any of you have sold a house, you sort of have to strip it of all of its personal items and anything that might impede somebody from seeing them live in that space. So you pretty much pull all of the artwork down, you pull any photos down, you have only one item on a shelf as opposed to 3 items. I mean, we're again, we're not big knick-knack people, or I don't like clutter. We don't own a lot of that kind of stuff, but it's amazing how even less than what we had, we needed to make it to stage for showings. So we put the house on the market. We obviously sold the house, but then we really had to downsize even more. So like I said, we got rid of a lot of things just in preparation for the sale. And then we needed to take a really hard look as we packed our things, because we were going from a 3,800 square foot house. And when I give you those numbers, those are the 2 main living levels. We had a full basement, but the basement was not finished, so our square footage did not include the basement. So 3,800 square feet of living space, and we were going from that down to 1,600 square feet, which is where we are currently. So I really had to look at, okay, do you need the bread maker that you literally haven't used in 10 years, Lisa? Do you need 3 crock pots? Maybe you just need 1 crock pot. But some of these things that you just, when you have, I don't want to say all the space in the world, because clearly there are people that own houses that are way, way bigger than ours was. But, you sort of tend to fill the space you have, right? So I needed to do a good look at those kind of things and see, okay, what do we really need? What don't we need? Then the other thing we needed to do was we had to move into temporary housing in Kansas City, which, a lot of you saw all of Vlogmas or Vlogaday was filmed in our temporary housing, because we couldn't close on this property until mid-November. So even though our contract on this property was signed in the middle of August, there are a lot of steps. New York is an incredibly complicated place to buy real estate. I will just say that off the bat. If there is one thing that I will let anybody know, if you're looking at moving somewhere like this, just know that everything takes a lot more effort, it takes a lot more time, and a lot more money. So anyway, I then had to pack, like I said, for sort of 2 occasions. So I had to pack for the move to what did we need to live, just like live at its bare minimum. And then everything else had to go into storage. And we did that one because we just physically didn't have room in the temporary housing, because the temporary housing was actually smaller than this, which turned out actually to be a really good thing, because we went to something smaller. When we got here, this actually felt bigger, which was nice. But we knew that most of our stuff was going to need to be in storage here in New York because we still needed to do this whole remodel. But so I had to basically pack, like I said, sort of for two different things. So we had a storage unit in Kansas City that had about probably 80% of our items, and then we had, the other 20% actually in the apartment that we were living in for 3 months. We sold both of our cars. So we sold mine first, actually right out, in fact, literally the day we closed on the house in Kansas City, we sold my car. And then we just had the one car. We had David's car until we literally were flying out the next day to come to New York in January. So we, like I said, moved from the house in Kansas City. So we had one move that was local, that they moved us from our house into the temporary housing, the apartment that we lived in. And that sort of involved a split move. So they moved some of the stuff to the apartment and some of the majority of it to the storage facility. And then when we moved here, we had a nationwide company, a cross-country, long haul, whatever they call it, movers, pick up the items from both locations. And then some of the things that we had in the apartment, I then also moved to storage because I knew that we wanted even less things when we were here, because we are going to have to live in one half of this condo. It's really a co-op, but I'm just calling it a condo or an apartment, whatever, while they do the renovation. And then we have to live in that side after they finish that so that they can do this side. And I will get into the whole, like, what we're doing and all that. I'm doing a whole, like, remodel vlog once it ever starts. So when I'm filming this is April 28th. We moved here on January 14th. We closed on November 15th. It has taken this long, so from November until we don't even have full approval yet to do this remodel. So when I say that things take a lot longer in New York, they take a lot longer in New York. Most people, when I say something about whatever, they're like, welcome to New York. So yeah, welcome to New York. So anyway, like I said, I will be doing a whole, remodel series and show you befores and afters and all that kind of thing. And I'll explain the whole process of the approvals and all that as it goes with there. But the bottom line is we finally got here. Our stuff arrived about the next week. So like I said, we have about 90%, I would say 85 to 90% of our things in storage here in New York, technically actually in Queens. And then we have the rest of our stuff here. So I also had several questions about how living here has impacted, or has it had any impact on my luxury shopping? And the quick answer is absolutely. So, I went from, as many of you know, if you've watched my prior videos, living in a city that has absolutely no luxury shopping. None. Zip. Zill. Nada. We have a Nordstrom in Kansas City, and a long time ago they used to carry Chloe, and they carried Burberry, but now there are no luxury brands carried at that Nordstrom. They only carry contemporary brands, so Tory Burch, Coach, Kurt Geiger. So like I said, I went from nothing to like the Mecca of shopping, right? Probably outside of maybe Paris and, maybe some places in Asia. I went to kind of, from like literally like sub-zero to like the top of the heap kind of thing. So, which has been amazing, right? But yeah, not without maybe some of its downside. So I would say it's definitely caused me to buy more because I have so much more opportunity, right? And I can see everything in person. Before, when I would shop, for example, with Chanel pieces, first of all, I was precluded from buying some Chanel pieces over the last, I don't know, whenever they started that new policy. You could only buy classics in person. So while I'm not a classic flat person, I do like the mini rectangular bags, and I do like the mini with top handles, but those were counted as part of the classics. So, if there was a mini that was coming out, I couldn't buy that. And then in addition to that, they instituted that whole, they can't send pictures out until after the first full week after a launch. So if a new collection launched on, Monday the 10th, they wouldn't be able to send out photos to those of us who were remote until Monday the 17th of a month. So that means that, potentially a lot of items were already sold out, some of those really hot ticket items, because supposedly they weren't reserving anymore. So, if you weren't there on launch day or within the few first days after launch, you weren't able to get those items. So that certainly impacted my ability to purchase. In addition to that, there were just brands that then I hadn't even been able to see in person, because even though I had relationships with some of the bigger brands, I wasn't able to see, for example, the Gucci's of the world, or the Celines of the world, or the Loewe's of the world, because where I was traveling, for example, on a regular basis to Denver, they had a Louis Vuitton, they had Neiman's, which carried Chanel. They did eventually open a Gucci store, but that was right at the very end of when I was traveling to Denver. So they had an Hermes, obviously, which that's where I shopped at for over a year. And then they had, like I said, the Chanel at the Neiman's, and they had a Louis Vuitton store. But that was it. So there were a ton of other brands that I just didn't have exposure to. And I didn't have a sales associate at those places because I'd never had the chance to develop that kind of relationship. So my main purchasing was in the Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Hermes space, because those were the brands where I had direct contact with sales associates and able to build those contacts. So now that I'm in a city that has all of these brands, I now have not only the ability to shop at the brands that I was already shopping at, I have the ability to shop at brands that I had no idea what they had before. I mean, obviously I've seen pictures, but you know what I mean. I was able to go in and really just observe the brand and touch the brand and really see what they're all about. And finally, as it relates to luxury shopping, as a content creator, it has been an amazing thing, right? I mean, you guys see, I'm now able to post a vlog basically every week of where I'm going. A lot of it is luxury shopping based, but some of it is just, being here and doing some of the things that we would never have an opportunity to do and see. And, taking the ferry, for example, and taking you guys on that trip and going down to the financial district and having lunch down there. And then, just all the things that go with living in New York. It's not just about the luxury shopping. Obviously, that's a big thing for me, and I think a big thing for you guys, but it has clearly moving here has given me the opportunity to create content that I never would have been able to create had I still been living in Kansas City. So finally, I'm going to share some differences between living in Kansas City and living in New York. Some of them are funny. Some of them are just sort of interesting, and some things that you would never even think about. But probably the first thing that we encountered was their school system. So at least I think for the majority of the country, you go to an elementary school that's within, your area of where you live, and then that feeds into a particular middle school, which then feeds into a particular high school. That sort of applies here in New York, except for when you get to high school, which all bets are off. And so it is a combination of you make a list, there's a lottery that's a part of it. It is incredibly complex and convoluted and hard to navigate, and any other word that you can come to describe that type of situation. Thankfully, we had the guidance of an amazing friend that we made here in New York. We were introduced to them by somebody else we made. To those of you who aren't familiar, there's something that's called Jewish geography. And it's basically so-and-so, and they're like, oh, really? Like, oh my gosh, I went to school with, so-and-so's brother or whatever. Like, it's almost like the whole Kevin Bacon thing, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you like take some other celebrity and you figure out how many steps does it take you to get to how it's connected to Kevin Bacon, because Kevin Bacon is connected to everything. Jewish geography is kind of like that, but for Jews. So anyway, through sort of a Jewish geography kind of thing, we were introduced to this fantastic family, and she was so helpful to us in, making our choices for high school and anything. But that was a huge difference, right? If we had stayed in Kansas City, Nick and Hannah would have finished 8th grade and gone to the high school where their brother and sister went, and it just would have been an automatic thing, and we wouldn't have thought twice about it. The other thing that's different about their schools is that it is incredibly antiquated here. For being, I think, what is the largest public school system in the country, everything here is still like handwritten forms, and like their grades aren't online. In Kansas City, if the kids were going to be absent, I could just go into an app and mark them absent and, click the radio button that said they were sick or they had an appointment or whatever it was, the reason why they were. And I'm just amazed at how little is automated here. I mean, like the kids, like they don't do anything online. All the stuff that Nick and Hannah did in Kansas City, all of their assignments were submitted online. Nothing here. It's all still paper and pen, which in some ways is a good thing, because I do think that we're getting a little bit out of, kids knowing how to write and how to actually have penmanship that is legible. But it's just interesting. It's just very different. Another thing that's different, you've seen this in some of my vlogs, is you really have to plan what you're doing. So like, for example, I had that whole, which bag should I use for my returns? In Kansas City, I would just, throw my packages in the back seat or in the trunk, and, I would drive to the UPS store or drive to the post office or whatever. Like, there wasn't a whole lot of planning involved. You didn't have to think about, do I have enough arms to carry all this? It's just, it does make things less convenient, I will say. And like I said, you have to plan your errands. If I need to return these things and then I also need to go grocery shopping, do you really want to do those things on the same day? Because you're going to have to take your grocery cart with you to do the returns. But if you're doing the returns and it's not like within a 2-block radius of where you're going to the grocery store, if let's say my return is at Saks, well, I'm not going to take the grocery cart all the way down to Saks on the subway and schlep that all around to then come back and go grocery shopping. So like I said, you just really have to think through your errands and what you're doing and do some definite planning. Another difference is how we go to Costco. So actually there is a Costco in Manhattan. There are definitely some in like Queens and Brooklyn and, where there's a little bit more land, but there actually is one on the island of Manhattan, and it's actually not too far from where we live. So going to Costco is not the issue, right? Getting there, it's actually super easy. I take the bus. It's like a 10-minute bus ride for me. I get off, I walk like 3 blocks to Costco. And it's great. But obviously the problem is, how do you get home from Costco? So if I don't buy too many things, and I know I'm only getting, going to get like what I can fit in my little push cart thing, then I'll do it that way and then I'll just take the bus home. But in general, I'm doing like more of a bigger run. How do I come home with like an entire thing of toilet paper or entire thing of paper towels? So you have 2 choices. You can either, if you don't have a car like we do, is you can call an Uber, which is what I have done. But they also have this thing like right outside the Costco that are like private taxis. And there's like a map on the wall that shows like these different zones, and depending on which zone you go to, that's how much it is. So it's not like an actual meter. The only thing that they don't tell you when you take those is that it's cash only. Well, the first time I went, which Hannah and I went together, and we got back, we got to the, to the place, and we unloaded all the groceries. The guy was very nice and he helped us unload it onto the curb. And then he was like, okay, you know, it's going to be $18 or whatever it was. And so I'd like my credit card to, you know, give him to swipe or whatever. And he's like, no, cash. And I was like, I don't have any cash. And he's like, well, that's all I take. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do about this? Because like, I don't have cash. Anyway, it was a whole thing. I ended up like Venmoing, I think, or Zelle, sending it by Zelle. I don't know, whatever it was. It was a whole pain in the butt. But anyway, so like, those are things that like, you just don't know, right? Until you do it, and the things that you learn as you live here. So definitely a live and learn type situation. And then here are some just sort of, I guess I would call them just like little funny differences, or just things that as I'm kind of going about my day, I'm like, huh, that's different. So for example, you know, you have to either buy a bag or bring bags here. Now, I think I mentioned this before. I realize that there are a lot of places in the world where this is the norm, but living in Kansas City, they haven't really discovered environmentally friendly, or, you know, they're not big on recycling. They're not, you know, none of these sort of environmental improvements have hit the middle of the country yet. So, you know, they just give us bags there. So we've got a lot of bags now because we forget to bring a bag and then we have to buy a bag. So that's number one. The next thing is that you don't wait for a walk light here. Now, we've actually known this for a long time. So since we started coming to the city, we knew that, right? I mean, New Yorkers don't wait for the light to turn green, or I'm talking about pedestrians. Don't wait for the light to turn green or for a walk sign. They will cross, if there's an opportunity to cross, they will cross the street, and they will basically push you out of the way if you're blocking them from crossing because you are from out of town and don't know the system, and so you're waiting for a walk light. So anyway, that's kind of funny, and I will say that I don't push people out of my way, but I have become one of those New Yorkers who, if I'm down like on Fifth Avenue where there's a lot of tourists, or God forbid Times Square when I'm like going like to take the subway or something and I'm getting on at that station, like, you know, and everyone is sitting there and they're all looking up at the, you know, big tall lights and whatever, and they're just standing there waiting for the walk light. And I'm like, I'm trying to go somewhere, people. Like, I have become that person who is like, get out of my way. Now, I don't say that out loud. I say that to myself, but I'm sort of like, you know, get the F out of my way. I'm trying to go somewhere. You're just standing around looking up in the air like a tourist at tall buildings, and I have a place to go. Anyway, truly become a New Yorker in that situation. The next funny thing, New Yorkers eat their pizza by folding it in half. I will never be a true New Yorker in this case because I don't understand that. I don't want to do that. I like to eat my pizza, you know, sitting out flat, just eating it like a slice. I don't like that double thing. I don't want it that way, but a true New Yorker eats their pizza folded in half. Another thing, kids here swear all the time. Now, I do my fair share of swearing. I mean, I try not to do it in front of the kids, obviously, but you know, I'm known to throw around, you know, a swear word for sure. But like kids all the time, like you will hear them on the street and they are dropping the F-bomb and whatever. They say it in school. They talk back to the teachers. That's something I'm not too fond of. And it definitely kind of, I don't want to say freaked Nick and Hannah out, but it was definitely a big shock to them. I mean, they were like this would never happen in Kansas City. Like, kids would never be disrespectful or talk to teachers that way. So that has been not such a great difference, I have to say. And one of the other weird things about in New York is when you're standing in line, like to check out somewhere, they say following. And I was like, what? I'm like, so they don't say next in line, or I can help the next person. Like, that's, I guess, I think what I'm used to most people saying, like if I'm somewhere, you know, or I can help the next guest. Here they say following or following guest. Following guest. Anyway, it's interesting. I don't know where I understand it. I understand the concept that I am the following person. Like, it's not that I don't understand the word. It's just interesting, like I said, but they all do it. Doesn't matter where you go. I've been at restaurants, I've been at stores, you know, it's obviously the term that they have learned to use in New York. They don't say, you know, I can help the next person. They say following. And my last little funny one is they don't have convenience stores here. So they have these things called bodegas, which are like I mean, they're sort of like convenience stores, but they're really more like little, tiny little baby grocery stores that have some great food. Like sandwiches and things that you can get at bodegas are supposed to be amazing. I'm talking about like the Quick Trips of the world, or for those of you who live in the East Coast, Wawa, I think. And then I feel like there's another big one like in like the South. But I'm talking about like full-fledged convenience store where you go and there is a wall of fountain drinks that you can get, and a wall of, you know, slushies that you can get, and a wall of coffees that you can get, or iced tea, and, you know, donuts and whatever. In addition, obviously they sell gas too, which they don't obviously need here. I mean, there are gas stations here, but the only thing they really have are 7-Elevens. And those are tiny, they're really not. So the only place that I can get a fountain drink is at a 7-Eleven, and they're not super, there's not a ton of them in the city. There just aren't many of them. So it's probably better for me because I'm not drinking nearly the amount of Coke Zero that I used to drink. I mean, maybe I have one once every couple of weeks. Like every once in a while I'll be like, you know, I really feel like a Coke Zero. So I'll walk down. It's about a 7-block walk for me to get to the closest 7-Eleven. But they don't have convenience stores here. It's just different. So that's it, my friends. I know this was kind of a chatty and probably a long, I have no idea because I was, you know, filming this in segments, so I have no idea how long this is going to actually be. I'm assuming it's going to be a fairly long video trying to explain all this to you. If you made it through the video, in the comments, in addition to whatever else you want to say, put the Statue of Liberty emoji in your comment, so I know that you made it to the end of this video. But anyway, hopefully that answered, you know, your questions. If you have more, I'm happy to answer them. Like I said, we'll do a whole like remodel series, so you'll see the befores and after and everything of what this place looks like. I mean, you know, as you guys can see behind me, there's like this little, I feel like I'm a weather person, but that little thing right there that you see on the wall, that's like the person that lived here before had like a ton of artwork and stuff, and so they left all the like nails and like little picture hook things all over the walls, so everything is going to be redone. So it's like, I don't even want, it's not even worth me like taking those out because they're just going to take them out when they do. It's just not worth it. But anyway, we will go through that whole series and do that. But if you have other specific questions about, like I said, living in New York, or, you know, how things are different, you know, it's, you know, the three main things, it's definitely a different style of living. It is definitely more expensive to live here, but we are enjoying it so much. So anyway, like I said, hope you enjoyed. If you did, please give this video a thumbs up. It really does help the YouTube algorithm. And if you haven't subscribed and enjoy what the majority of my content is, although, you know, sometimes we do these chit chat videos, I would love it if you would click the subscribe button and the notification bell. And wherever you are, I hope you are having an amazing day or evening, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.